Good evening. This is A Course in Miracles, Palm Beach Study Group. We are on Chapter 7, Section 8, The Unbelievable Belief. We have said that without projection, there can be no anger. But it is also true that without extension, there can be no love. These reflect a fundamental law of the mind, and therefore one that always operates. It is the law by which you create and were created. It is the law that unifies the kingdom and keeps it in the mind of God. To the ego, the law is perceived as a means of getting rid of something it does not want. To the Holy Spirit, it is the fundamental law of sharing, by which you give what you value in order to keep it in your mind. To the Holy Spirit, it is the law of extension. To the ego, it is the law of deprivation. It therefore produces abundance or scarcity, depending on how you choose to apply it. This choice is up to you, but it is not up to you to decide whether or not you will utilize the law. Every mind must project or extend, because that is how it lives, and every mind is life. So without projection, which is of the ego, there can be no anger. But without extension, which is of the spirit, there can be no love. And both of these reflect the fundamental law, one that is always in operation. It's the law by which you create and were created. It's the law that unifies the kingdom and keeps it in the mind of God. From the ego's point of view, the law is perceived as a means of getting rid of something. In other words, by giving it away is what it's talking about. But to the Holy Spirit, it's the law of sharing, because we've been told over and over again that if you want something, you have to give it away. And it is in the giving of it away that you obtain it. So the Spirit sees it as a law of sharing, but the ego sees it as the law of deprivation, that you gave something away. It doesn't see the sharing aspect, the ego doesn't. And so the same law produces either abundance or scarcity, depending how you choose to apply it. In other words, we have free will, and it is our choice. We have the choice of using the ego and mind to give something away and think of it as deprivation, that we lost something, thus making us angry, or to use spirit mind, that we gave something away, thus sharing, and so creating abundance. And it's the choice is up to you. We have free will. But our free will doesn't decide the law. The law is the law is the law is the law. And then it says, every mind must project or extend. That is how the mind lives, and every mind is life. So knowing the law is one thing, and using the law is something else. And understanding the law is very important. Any questions, comments? Paragraph 2. The ego's use of projection must be fully understood before the inevitable association between projection and anger can be finally undone. And that's our goal, is to undo the ego. The ego always tries to preserve conflict. It is very ingenious in devising ways that seem to diminish conflict because it does not want you to find conflict so intolerable that you will insist on giving it up. The ego, therefore, tries to persuade you that it can free you of conflict. Least you give the ego up and free yourself. Using this own warped version of the laws of God, the ego utilizes the power of the mind only to defeat the mind's real purpose. It projects conflict from your mind to other minds in an attempt to persuade you that you have gotten rid of the problem. So basically all that's saying is that the ego is the master trickster, always trying to trick us into believing the opposite of what it is. And so it's very important that we fully understand before we can undo. Paragraph 3. There are two major errors involved in this attempt. First, strictly speaking, conflict cannot be projected because it cannot be shared. Any attempt to keep part of it and get rid of another part does not really mean anything. Remember that a conflicted teacher is a poor teacher and a poor learner. His lessons are confused, and their transfer value is limited by his confusion. The second error is the idea that you can get rid of something you do not want by giving it away. Giving is how you keep it. The belief that by seeing it outside, you have excluded it from within is a complete distortion of the power of extension. I'll say that again. The belief that by seeing it outside you, have excluded it from within is a complete distortion of the power of extension. That is why those who project are vigilant for their own safety. They are afraid that their projections will return and hurt them. Believing they have blotted their projections from their own minds, they also believe their projections are trying to creep back in. Since the projections have not left their minds, they are forced to engage in constant activity in order not to recognize this. So there's a big conundrum going on here. What do you call it? It's like the rock hitting the hard, stuck between the rock and the hard place. It's by trying to operate under ego's method, you're just reinforcing ego. And that's just going to get you more of what you say you don't want. So that's the error. Conflict cannot be projected because it cannot be shared. If you're projecting conflict, you're doing that to yourself. The second error is the idea that you could get rid of something you do not want by giving it away. But by giving it away, you bring it back to you. So that doesn't work either. So if you're trying to give conflict away, you're just going to be embroiled in more conflict. Any questions, comments?
Well, that happened to me today.
Uh-oh.
I said something that somebody thought was inappropriate, so they brought it to my attention. I took it as criticism, and I waited probably only a half hour, and they did the same thing. And I said, should I bring it to their attention like they did with me or not? And I said, not. And then I said, I am going to bring it to their attention just to, and I shouldn't have done it because it created more conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It felt good at the moment, but in the long run, it didn't feel too good.
Right. Well, you learn from your experience, though.
I hope.
You should always follow your first instinct, because at first you said, no, don't do it. But then you went ahead and did it anyway. So
I suffered the consequences.
yes. But at least you realized it. At least you had the opportunity to reflect upon it and learn from the situation.
I learned another thing, that people's egos come into play when they're at a weak point, if they're tired or hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And I know because that's what happens with me.
Mm.
I'm not thinking that well on my feet. And that's where sometimes letting go or forgiving is good to practice, and love is good to practice. And just say that when they're in their ego, it's a weak point. They're in a weak point. I don't know how better to say it, but
Well, that's fine. Yeah, but you're right. We all get caught unaware at times because we're tired, fatigued, hungry, just out of sorts for whatever reason. And so our guard is lowered. It's hard to be, good all of the time. But that's why we're learning. We're learning.
yeah. Well, this is good to reinforce the good things, reading, the course
Mm.
and practicing it.
Yes. Shall we go on?
Let's go for it.
All right. Number 4. You cannot perpetrate an illusion about another without perpetrating it about yourself. There is no way out of this because it is impossible to fragment the mind. To fragment is to break into pieces, and mind cannot attack or be attacked. The belief that it can, an error the ego always makes, underlies its whole use of projection. It does not understand what mind is, and therefore does not understand what you are. Yet its existence is dependent on your mind because the ego is your belief. The ego is a confusion in identification. Never having had a consistent model, it never developed consistency. It is the product of the misapplication of the laws of God by distorted minds that are misusing their power. Well, this is actually giving us a very good definition of what the ego is. So, starting at the beginning, you cannot perpetrate an illusion about another without perpetrating it about yourself. Why? Because there's only one of us. And there's no way out of this. Again, because there's only one of us. Our mind is whole, and it's impossible to fragment the mind. Mind cannot be attacked nor can it attack. But the ego believes that it can. And that's why it uses projection. The ego doesn't understand mind, and therefore it doesn't understand what you are, because mind is from spirit, and ego doesn't understand that you are spirit. Ego wants to think that you are your body, that you are the material form. But because ego is our belief, and when you believe that in the ego, you believe you are your body. And so now you're in a confusion of identification. And that's what being in the ego is. It's a confusion of identification, because if you knew yourself to be spirit and you identified yourself as spirit and not as body, then you would not be confused. So, ego is the misapplication of the laws of God by a distorted mind, misusing the mind's power. And that's what ego is. And all that happened because at one time we thought we could separate ourselves from God. And that's how the ego was created in the first place. We split our mind. Yes, David.
So what's coming to my mind is that when we're in ego, we're mentally ill.
Well, the Course says over and over again that the ego is insane. That to think with the ego is insanity. Yes, mentally ill.
So people that, are, quote, mentally ill, diagnosed as mentally ill, they're too much in the ego or in the ego. So that's all of us.
Well, it's everybody in the world who is incarnate at this moment, because once we finally get to the place of being the reunification of the mind, then we're not here anymore, unless we choose to be. Paragraph 5, do not be afraid of the ego. It depends on your mind, and as you made it by believing in it, so you can dispel it by withdrawing belief from it. Do not project the responsibility for your belief in it to anyone else, or you will preserve the belief. When you are willing to accept sole responsibility for the ego's existence, you will have laid aside all anger and all attack, because they come from an attempt to project responsibility for your own errors. But having accepted the errors as yours, do not keep them. Give them over quickly to the Holy Spirit to be undone completely, so that all their effects will vanish from your mind and from the sonship as a whole. So there it is. That's the game plan. Don't be afraid of the ego. Withdraw the belief from your mind by giving it to Holy Spirit. And Holy Spirit will undo that belief. That's what the Holy Spirit is there for. 6, the Holy Spirit will teach you to perceive beyond your belief, because truth is beyond belief, and his perception is true. The ego can be completely forgotten at any time, because it is a totally incredible belief, and no one can keep a belief he is judged to be unbelievable. The more you learn about the ego, the more you realize that it cannot be believed. The incredible cannot be understood because it is unbelievable. The meaninglessness of perception based on the unbelievable is apparent, but it may not be recognized as being beyond belief because it is made by belief. So what we need to do is forget the ego. The ego can be completely forgotten at any time. We don't have to fight with the ego. We don't have to try to rid ourselves of the ego. All we have to do is forget the ego. And the best way to forget the ego is to just think with spirit, no matter what happens. Turn to the mind of spirit within yourself and forget the ego completely. And that's how we'll be rid of the ego. In doing that, we're turning the ego over to Holy Spirit to remove that belief from our mind. And then paragraph 7, the whole purpose of this course is to teach you that the ego is unbelievable and will forever be unbelievable. You who made the ego by believing the unbelievable cannot make this judgment alone. By accepting the atonement for yourself, you are deciding against the belief that you can be alone, thus dispelling the idea of separation and affirming your true identification with the whole kingdom is literally part of you. This identification is as beyond doubt as it is beyond belief. Your wholeness has no limits because being is infinity.
We are one.
We are one. So there, that paragraph 7, you should write that out and tack it up on your mirror in the bathroom and read it every morning as soon as you wake up or something. You know, the ego's unbelievable. So forget about it. Just forget about it. Anything, David?
You said it all.
Ah, just forget about it.
Actually, the line where you said the ego, oh Jesus, escaped me. Should be left alone. How'd you put that? It's like 2 lines back.
Well,
Basically, you got to forget about the ego.
yes.
And earlier it said, well, the ego is unbelievable.
Yes.
We should forget about the ego and be the spirit, be the love,
Right.
be the whole.
Yes. The ego can be forgotten completely at any time because it is a totally incredible belief.
How do we remain conscious so we can do that? Or you don't remain conscious, you just be the love, be the wholeness.
Yeah, you just keep that idea in your mind, and every time something happens that you recognize as ego, flip your thought and say, no, I'm not my body. I am spirit. I'm only going to react with love. I'm not going to allow myself to get trapped in ego. I'm just going to forget about the ego. It's a mental thing, and it has to happen in our mind.
I told this story to you before about many years ago. I was at a trade show, and this very attractive woman said something to me. I was walking by her, and there was a group of people there, and she said something about my appearance. So I said to her, I'm more than my body. I don't even know where that came from, or whether I was into my mantra of we are one, but everybody seemed to understand that it's that we are more than our body. We're much more, and that's where one time it came to mind that when we die, we're still not gone. We're still around. We are in spirit, and I try to learn that I'm in spirit all the time. Somehow I knew at that time I knew I was in spirit, even though I never put it to words. I'm more than I'm not my ego. I'm much more than that. And then I forgave her my mind. I said she doesn't know me, or else she wouldn't make. Or if she doesn't know herself, or is that the projection? she was projecting because she was concerned about beauty more than
Right.
the spirit of love.
Yeah. But even saying that you're more than your body is a misnomer, because you're not your body in the first place. The body is just an illusion. It's an ego projection. You are immortal spirit, whole and innocent. That's who you truly are. The body is just an illusion. So it's not that you're more than your body. You're not even your body in the first place. Your body's just an ego projection. It's a dream. It's a hologram. It doesn't even exist in reality, because reality only exists in spirit. Anyway, we have reached the end of this chapter. And so the end of this section. And next week we'll be going on to section 9, the extension of the kingdom. So let's take a few moments of silence, please, as we come to the end of our session for today.